We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 38a. On the previous summit, the sages of Nahardoi said that if a person buys a single date tree, he acquires all the land underneath it all the way until the depths, even though when you acquire a single tree, you don't get any of the surrounding land, but you do get the land directly beneath. And the Rashbam said it means to say, let's say, for example, the tree dies, you'll be able to plant a new one in that place. And the Gemara continues, Ma'askif lo Rava. Rava asked on this, V'lei molei, why can't he say to him, Korkama derishka zvini lach, that I sold you a plant, this is the saffron crocus plant. The point is it's a kind of plant that's uprooted after it finishes producing. Akor chorkama derishka vizil, you should uproot this plant and get out of here. And so therefore the same thing essentially should apply over here. Why should you acquire the land directly beneath the tree? The Rashbam here explains, Maskefala Rava. Rava asks, Amai kana karka, why is it that he would acquire the land, decheneged ho'ilan, which is opposite the tree, which is beneath the tree? Me'achar detanan lo kana, karka klal lo kana. It says in the Mishnah he doesn't acquire. It sounds like you don't acquire any land. In other words, what the sages of Nahardoi said seems to go against the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that if you buy a single tree, you don't get any land. And now the sages of Nahardoi are saying that you do get the land that's directly beneath. Now that which you might ask, since the whole point is you buy a tree, you want it to remain in the land where it is. So isn't he acquiring the nutrients from the land? Wouldn't that mean that he can even plant another one if this one dies? After this one either dries out or it's cut. So if that's going to be your argument for why he should acquire at least the land directly beneath, it's not true. Because because the seller can then say to the buyer, Korkama derishka zvini loch, meaning uragilim lemachor bekarko manicho at shigmor peira va'okro. The point over here is that by this kind of a plant, this saffron crocus plant, the way it works is you leave it in the earth until it finishes producing its fruits, and then when the fruits are finished being produced, then you uproot it. And so the same thing is true here. This is what the seller tells the buyer. Same thing is true with the tree that I sold you. Lepeirosa for its fruits. I didn't sell you any land. It's just that you can leave the tree in this land of mine all the time that it requires the land for nutrients, until it dries out. That's similar to the saffron. Once it dries out, you can no longer use the land anymore. That's essentially what Rav is asking. Just like you say by the chorkama, akor chorkama derishka vazil, take the chorkama and go. So too over here, that's the same thing when you buy a single tree. The seller can tell that to the buyer. And so the Gemara instead says, Elo amar Rava, rather Rava says, if you're going to say anything in terms of the land directly beneath the tree, beba machmas taina, you have to say we're talking when the person has a specific claim regarding getting that land. And the Rashbam says, first back on the chorkama, akor chorkama derishka vazil, kemosha okram esacharkam achash nesbashel, just like you uproot the saffron after it's ripened, veino yochalita karkam achar b'makomo, you can't plant another one in its place. Kamata lo sita ilan achar b'makomo, again, you can't plant another tree here. And the Rashbam continues, Elo amar Rava, rather Rava says, if you're going to say anything about the land beneath the tree, hachahu dekani lekarka shetachas ilan, the only time where you would get any land beneath the tree, beba machmas hataina, that's if you have a specific claim, shetoin lamocher befeirush macharta lihoilan. The case would be where the buyer says that the mocher specifically included the land. V'hakarka shetachta, if he included the land beneath it, lita acher b'makomo, just for the purpose again of planting another one in its place when it dries up. Ubeshtar, and there was a document to that effect. V'chalte shnei chazaka, and now I've been here 3 years already. V'lonisharti b'shtar, I wasn't careful with my document. Yoser mishalosh shanim, more than 3 years. Dehashta lo dami lechorkama derishka. That's already not similar to chorkama derishka. That would be a case where you can get the land directly beneath the tree. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Mar Kashisha breder of Chisla Rav Ashi. But Mar Kashisha, the son of Rav Chisla, said to Rav Ashi, V'chorkama derishka zavanle. But what if that was the arrangement, like a case of korkama derishka, where the idea is you only get it until it dries out or until you uproot it, you don't get to plant another one. My havale lamevad. What should the seller do? What it means to say over here is that let's say a buyer can always just make this claim. A buyer can always say, oh, the deal was, the stipulation was, I get the land beneath the tree. tree. And what is the seller supposed to do in response to that? And the Gemara says to that simply, that's not true. The seller does have a response. He should have protested. Meaning to say, in a situation where someone is sitting with this single tree and he doesn't own any of the land, it's the responsibility of the seller to protest, to lodge a protest within the first 3 years, so that the buyer does not establish a chazak and he's not able to simply claim that he acquired the land under the tree. That's the whole point of lodging that protest. And the Gemara says, because if you don't say that there's this requirement upon the sellers in certain cases to lodge a protest, so you have a case we mentioned earlier in the parak, Hani Mashkanta de Surah, when it comes to the collateral of Surah, the Chasa Bahachi, which is written as follows. This is when the lender takes a piece of land as collateral and he's taking the produce, and it says in the contract, Mishlam Shnaya Elaine, when this amount of years finishes, regardless of how much produce he takes, he might take much more produce than the loan, he might take less produce than the loan, but regardless, when this certain number of years finishes, Tepuk Arado below Kesef, then this land goes back to you without any money, meaning it's considered like your loan is paid off. So here you have the same problem. If this creditor, if he hides the document that says it's collateral, and he says that I bought it, he tries to claim that it's his property, you think he'll be believed? Would Rabbanan have an institution that's going to come to a loss which is not fair, because now he'll essentially be able to claim it's his land when it's not? But you have to say the same thing. Rather, you have to say it's the responsibility of the person who owes the money and is giving this land as collateral. He has to lodge a protest to prevent a chazaka. Here also, he has to lodge a protest. If he doesn't do so, then of course it is possible that the person will be able to claim chazaka. That's why it's his responsibility to lodge this protest. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shalosh arotzos l'chazaka. There are 3 separate lands when it comes to chazaka. Yehuda ve'ever hayardin v'hagalil. The 3 lands are Yehuda and the other side of the Yarden and the Galil. And the idea is as follows: Haya Yehuda. Let's say the person is in Yehuda v'hechzik b'Galil, but then somebody tries to take possession of his property in Galil, or the reverse, b'Galil he's in Galil v'hechzik b'Yehuda, and the chazaka is in Yehuda. Ain't a chazaka, that is not a good chazaka, ad she'imo b'Medina achas, unless they're together in the same province. The idea over here is, as we will explain, if a person makes a chazaka in a piece of land and the actual owner of that land is far away in a different province where he's never going to hear about the chazaka, the travel is limited between the 2 places, so then he doesn't really have an opportunity to protest, and since he does not have an opportunity to protest, therefore the chazaka is not going to be a good chazaka. And the point over here is these 3 areas, Yehuda, Ever HaYarden, and Galil, they're considered separate. It's considered like there's no real good travel between these various areas. For example, if a person would be in Yehuda in one city and then the field would also be in Yehuda in a different city in Yehuda, so there already, when the person makes a chazaka, the word would reach the person, the original owner. He would realize someone's trying to make a chazaka on his property, and he'd be able to lodge a protest. And the Mishnah continues with another opinion. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Lo amru shalosh shanim. The only reason they said that a chazaka is 3 years, el kadei sheyehei ba'aspamya, the idea is that even if the owner is far away, even if he's in Spain, but v'yachzik shana, the other person takes possession of the field for a year, and yelchu v'yodiu shana, then it might take a year for them to let the owner know who's in Spain, v'yavel shana acheres, and then he comes the 3rd year to protest. That's the whole reason for the idea of chazaka being 3 years, and so therefore, even if it's a situation where it's very far away, still it is possible to make a chazaka according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara says, "My kosavar Tanakama." What exactly does the Tanakama of the Mishnah hold that specifically between these different lands, these different provinces, you can't make a chazaka? Ikosavar macha shelo b'fanav have macha. If the Tanakama holds that a protest not in front of the person who's making a chazaka on the property is considered to be a protest, meaning if the original owner wants to lodge a protest before 2 witnesses, not before the person who's taking the property, if that is considered to be a good protest, so afilu Yehuda v'Galil nami. So even if, let's say, the original owner protesting is in Yehuda and the land is in Galil, it should still be fine because he can still lodge his protest. He doesn't need to protest right in front of the person who's making the chazaka. And ikosavar macha shelo b'fanav lo have macha. If the Tanakama holds that a macha not in front is not considered to be a protest, that you have to do it in front of the person making the chazaka, so afilu Yehuda v'Yehuda nami lo. So even if they're in 2 different cities in Yehuda, but still it's not really b'fanav, and so therefore the chazaka should not be a chazaka. And the Gemara answers, Amar Bava Bar Memel, Amar Rav. Bava Bar Memel says that Rav says, Liolam kasavar. Really, the Tanakama holds, Macha shelo b'fanav have macha, that a protest not in front of the person making the chazaka chazaka is a good protest. You could be far away. But the question then is, if you could be far away, so why is it that it's not a chazaka? Let's say the person making the protest is in Galil and the land is in Yehuda. The reason is, our Mishnah is talking b'shas chayrim, meaning to say, you're talking about in a situation where the travel is difficult between the various places because it's a time of chayrim, essentially a time of peril. And so therefore, that's why in this particular case, where people are not really traveling between these two places, so the word doesn't really travel as well. The person doesn't find out that somebody is on his land, and the chazak is not going to be good. And the Gemara continues and elaborates, so Ma'ishna Yehuda v'Galil denakit, if that's the case, so just say b'shas chayrim. Why do you have to start picking locations, Yehuda and Galil? Just say if it's a time of chayrim, if it's a time of peril, so then you can't make a chazaka. And the Gemara answers, hakamash malon, the Mishnah means to teach us, and we will take a look at Tosas here. Tosas says, macha shalo b'fan, of a protest not in front of him. Again, the Gemara is discussing whether a protest not in front of the person who's being machzik, does that count as a protest or not? So Tosas asks, Taim, it's a wonder, dev'chol duchti nakat macha. The Gemara always chooses the language of macha, whether a macha is a good macha, if it's shalo b'fanav or not. V'amaylo nakat chazaka shalo b'fanav, have a chazaka. Why doesn't the Gemara choose a different term, which would be chazaka shalo b'fanav? If you make a chazaka not in front of the original owner, is that a chazaka or not? Why is the Gemara choosing the term macha shalo b'fanav instead of chazaka shalo b'fanav? V'yesh lomar and Tosas answer, lefi shatam talui b'macha v'lo b'chazaka, because everything is really dependent on the protest, not on the chazaka. Sha'adam hamachzik b'karkaosav shel chaveru islay kola shu choker v'shoel al nechasav. Because if a person is making a chazaka on the land of his friend, so there already you have a koll, the word goes out, because a person is always inquiring about his property, he'll find out that somebody is on his property. Aval hamacha, but when it comes to lodging a protest, ein la kol, that doesn't have the same koll. The word is not going to necessarily reach the person who is establishing the chazaka. Ein la kol kol kach, it's not as much of a koll. She'ein hamachzik mechazer and mochel bal karka, because a person who's a machzik is not necessarily looking to see if anyone is protesting. Lefikach ein chezkasu chazaka. Therefore, if you're going to say macha shelo b'fanav is not a macha, therefore the chazaka is not going to be a chazaka kashein yachol l'shma macha. So when he's not able to hear the person who's protesting, to ma yoel shamicha, because what's it going to help if he protests if the person cannot hear about it? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Ches Amid Beis.